You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Quick reminder off the top to hit the like button. Comment down below. Mailbag Monday will be here sooner than you realize. And do me a quick favor, go and hit that subscribe button real quick. It only takes 2 seconds to support the show and is the best way to do so. That way, you can also get the latest episode as soon as it's uploaded to YouTube each and every day. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Obviously, just going with the Locked On Blackhawks overlay today for those of you who are watching on YouTube. I am actually on the road traveling to Orlando to be covering a golf tournament, with that being the case. Unfortunately, no video for the show, but I figured, hey, audio would be better than nothing. If you're someone who regularly follows on YouTube, I do apologize for the inconvenience. We'll be back up to regular video episodes coming out tomorrow, as I'll be checked into my hotel. And if anyone, doesn't like just looking at the Locked On Blackhawks overlay, can easily find Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may listen to your podcast. It's very convenient when you're driving to or from work, when you're on your lunch break, whatever it may be. 100% free as well to check it out. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be. But Blackhawks fans, we are now just 48 hours away, just over 48 hours away, from the 2025 NHL trade deadline, and we're starting to see some dominoes fall. And from what it seems like at this point in time, we're kind of just waiting for a deal to get done for the most attractive trade chip and possibly the only member of the Blackhawks to get moved before Friday afternoon, which is Ryan Donato. A couple of moves that have gone down in the last couple of days that could impact Donato's value, or at least give us a better understanding of what the return could be for Donato if the Blackhawks do elect to trade him. First, the Minnesota Wild acquired Gustav Nyquist from the Nashville Predators in exchange for a 2026 second-round pick, so not a selection in this year's NHL draft, but in next year's. So guesstimating a little bit here, probably a mid to late second-round pick that Nashville's getting in return. Minnesota, you figure they're going to be competitive next season once again. In Nyquist, he's a 35-year-old winger who has 21 points, only 9 goals and 12 assists in 57 games this year. Disappointing offensive season, and in terms of victories as well for the Predators. But Nyquist did tally 75 points in the year prior for Nashville, and is also only signed on for $1.59 million through the end of this season. So a very cheap rental for a guy who also has done some good things in the Stanley Cup playoffs the last 2 years and throughout his career as well. I would say a late second round pick is a pretty fair value for Gustav Nyquist joining Minnesota. Another trade that was a little more complicated. It was actually a 3-way deal that went down between the Boston Bruins, the New Jersey Devils, and the Edmonton Oilers. Essentially, from at least what I was able to dissect, maybe I got this wrong. I apologize if that's the case. But Edmonton wound up acquiring Trent Frederick from the Boston Bruins in exchange for a second. And a 4th-round pick was also involved in that deal, but I am not still 100% positive based on the wordings of the tweets that I've seen from this trade. But either way, a second for Trent Frederick coming from the Boston Bruins, coming from the Edmonton Oilers, probably going to be a later selection, you would imagine, as well in this year's draft. Frederick's a 27-year-old forward who has 15 points, 8 goals, and 7 assists in 57 games this year. But like Nyquist, was really solid the year prior. 40 points, a career high for him, 18 goals, 22 assists in 82 games, and is signed on for very cheap $575,000 through the end of this season. So those are 2 dominoes that have already fallen off the board. Jake Evans was someone who was rumored to be on the trade market, and apparently, according to Frank Saravalli, the Habs had better than a late second round pick in exchange for Evans, but they actually signed him to a 4-year contract extension. So he's off of the market as well, which could help out Ryan Donato's trade value. But Evans, 28-year-old center, has 28 points, 12 goals, and 16 assists in 61 games this year for Montreal, on pace to set a new career high in points as he's never tallied more than 30 in his career. And prior to him signing that extension, was signed on for $1.7 million for the rest of the season. So that kind of sets the table a little bit and gives us an idea of what we could be working with if Ryan Donato gets traded. I next wanted to bring up TSN's trade bait list for the players that, according to TSN, are the most attractive on the trade block as of right now. Coming in at number 1 is Brock Nelson of the New York Islanders, center who's tallied 41 points in 60 games this year, but is 33 years old and has a $6 million cap hit through the end of the season on an expiring contract. Islanders are going to have to retain in order to move Nelson, maybe even get a third party involved to make it more attractive if that's feasible. Second on this list is Brock Besser for the Vancouver Canucks, who is on an expiring contract as well as a winger. He's tallied 36 points in 53 games this year. Down season for him. Pretty disastrous season for the Vancouver Canucks as a whole, but Besser is only 28 years old, and as I mentioned in Mailbag Tuesday on yesterday's episode, he's someone I would be interested in if I was the Chicago Blackhawks, if they're not going to go the top tier free agent market in this year's this year's free agent class, and Mikko Rantanen and Mitch Marner. At number 3 is Scott Laughton for the Philadelphia Flyers, a center who's tallied 27 points in 58 games this year, 30 years old, but not a rental like the other two. He has one more year left on his current deal at $3 million. Rickard Rakell is next at number 4 for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Winger that's got 52 points in 62 games this year. Solid season for Rickard Rakell, but with the Penguins being in the spot they're in, could make sense to trade him, but he does have 3 more years left on his current contract at $5 million. Next up is Rasmus Ristolainen, a defenseman. 6th is Brandon Tanev, who's tallied 17 points in 59 games this season for the Seattle Kraken, and is signed on, though, for $3.5 million on an expiring contract through the end of this year. At number 7, that brings us to Ryan Donato. 45 points, 22 goals, and 23 assists in 59 games this season. Career highs all across the board. Can play both the center and the wing position, but is probably more naturally a wing, and is signed on for $2 million on an expiring contract. Honestly, to me, looking at this trade bait list, Ryan Donato could easily be there for me at number 3 or number 4, maybe even as high as number 2, especially because he's only signed on at $2 million. That is very cheap at the end of this year. And quite honestly, even though, someone like Scott Laughton, who signed on for one more season, isn't necessarily a rental, and you get a little bit more security for him signed on for that extra year. Same with, someone like Rickard Rakell, who's got 3 more years left on his current deal. There is a chance a guy like Ryan Donato, if you like what you see out of him and you have some cap space, there is a chance you could bring him back because he's only 28 years old, whereas, Scott Laughton's already 30, Brock Nelson's already 33 years old. So that certainly makes Ryan Donato more attractive to me, at least. I don't know, Blackhawks fans. I do still think if it winds up being Ryan Donato in a flat trade, should the Blackhawks elect to deal him, it's probably a late second-round pick. Maybe someone gets desperate enough to give them a late first-round pick. I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that. I also wonder if general manager Kyle Davidson would have any interest in maybe throwing in a 4th-round selection to get that first-round pick in return, because we know they're stockpiled on picks over the next few years. They do have 2 4th-round selections in this year's draft class. And shoot, if it even took a third, Ryan Donato in a third to get a first-round pick back, I'd probably do that. We'll see what winds up happening. Another thing that works in Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks' favor, again, they don't necessarily have to trade Ryan Donato. I just like all the circumstances I outlined yesterday. He's going to be 29 years old next year. This is an outlier type of season. Who knows if Ryan Donato even wants to sign on with the Blackhawks for an extension. He's due for a raise for sure with his play this year. Career highs across the board, as I mentioned. For those reasons, you usually sell a guy like that, especially with the Blackhawks being in the situation they're in. Now, there are positives to keeping Ryan Donato around. So should they elect to keep him, I wouldn't be too mad. I'm just expecting them to wind up moving Ryan Donato. But should they wait until those last couple of hours right before the deadline and find a team who's desperate, especially in a seller's market like this is not the most attractive trade bait list that we're talking about here with 48 hours to go before this puppy's over. This is a seller's market for sure. And Ryan Donato, to me, is one of the most attractive trade chips left on the market. And we saw Gustav Nyquist, who only has 21 points this year. Ryan Donato has more goals than him. I know he showed the upside last year and has playoff pedigree. Donato's never played in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I believe. So that factors into it. But still, I think there's a chance the Blackhawks get a late first-round pick. We'll see what winds up happening. I wouldn't be opposed to Kyle Davidson maybe sweetening the pot a little bit in return with a mid-level draft pick. We'll see what winds up happening, or even like a defenseman prospect. No one that's on the scene right here, right now, but someone that could be intriguing, maybe that doesn't fit in the Blackhawks' future. I don't know. But this does feel like a good time for the Blackhawks to capitalize and get another valuable asset in return. We'll see what winds up happening with Ryan Donato tomorrow when the Blackhawks take on the tonight, when the Blackhawks take on the Ottawa Senators, as I'll break down here in just a moment. Ryan Donato, out there for the morning skate, out there during pregame warmups. There is the potential that he gets pulled. We've seen that type of stuff happen in the last couple of years. I'll keep you all updated right here on Locked On Blackhawks, but there's the latest on Ryan Donato's trade value with 2 days to go until the deadline. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into a preview of tonight's matchup against the Ottawa Senators. But first, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay right in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. As my followers on X have probably seen, I love to parlay an anytime goal scorer with someone's shots on goal or the total over or under for the game. But there's loads of options for whatever you'd like to place a wager on. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com in order to join today. Again, that's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. So what are you waiting for? Go and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 2, real quick, Blackhawks fans. Going to take a sip of water. Segment 2, coming off of a rather sweet 5-1 win over the Los Angeles Kings on Monday night in Spencer Knight's team debut. Hawks are going to try to keep it rolling and win a third consecutive game for just the second time this season as they take on the Ottawa Senators at the United Center. Heads up, this is a 6:30 p.m. Central Time puck drop at the UC tonight, something that doesn't happen very often. Will be televised on CHSN as per usual, but do want to give everyone the scoop. Not the regular 7:30 p.m. Central Time puck drop, 6:30 tonight at the UC. It's actually the first meeting of the season between these two teams. They'll, interestingly enough, face off again to close out the 2024-25 regular season in Ottawa on April 15th. While outside of, the Blackhawks trying to keep it going and pick up a 3-game winning streak for just the second time this season, it's not a very meaningful contest for them as the rest of their other 20 games will be down the stretch here. Same can't be said for these Senators. They are desperately trying to sneak their way into the Stanley Cup playoffs. I'm happy for the fellas that do Locked On Sens. They've been grinding these last few seasons as the Senators have been going through their rebuild. Happy for them to be watching some meaningful hockey. Sens are 30-25-5 now on the season through 60 games. Find themselves just 1 point back of a Stanley Cup playoff spot out east. So this is one they need. They can't afford to lose this game against the Blackhawks, even if it is against the road. It's one of the worst teams in the NHL who's selling off pieces left and right. They need 2 points in this one. So the Blackhawks got to bring their best stuff to keep the winning streak going. But taking a brief look at the Senators lineup that they rolled with on Monday against the Washington Capitals. Top line of Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, and Claude Giroux. Absolutely lethal top line that does a lot of the offensive damage for the Senators squad. Blackhawks are going to have their hands full. I'm sure we'll probably see lots of Ilya Mikheyev and Teuvo Teravainen, maybe even Nick Foligno, should he be in the lineup. Usually the best defensive trio for the Blackhawks against Tkachuk, Stützle, and Claude Giroux. Second line for the Sens, David Perron, Josh Norris, and Drake Batherson. Third line is Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, and Michael Amadio. And then rounding things out is Noah Gregor, Adam Gaudette, and Matthew Highmore. Do those last two names sound familiar, Blackhawks fans? They should, because those two guys are absolute Blackhawks legends. Adam Gaudette, let me quickly pull up on my phone. What has Adam Gaudette been up to this season? I really liked Adam Gaudette. For anyone who's been a longtime listener or viewer of the podcast, I wish Adam Gaudette got more of an opportunity here in Chicago. Played some good games for the Senators. Immediately after being placed on waivers by the Blackhawks, didn't wind up working out in that stint, but has been back for them this season. And how about it for Gaudette? 16 goals, 6 assists, 22 points in 59 games. I know he got off to a really good start this season, but nice to see him doing good work. Him and Highmore on the fourth line. Those guys are destined to record a point in this game, aren't they? Defensively for the Sens, it's all about Jake Sanderson and Artem Zub and that top pairing. And then obviously Thomas Chabot, the two deadly lefties on the back end. For the Sens, Nick Jansen paired up with Thomas Chabot, or at least he was on Monday when the Sens took on the Washington Capitals. And then Travis Hamonic, who I quite honestly completely forgot is still in the NHL. It's funny because the Hawks haven't played the Senators so far this year. They only play them twice a season, obviously. Like, there's a lot of guys just out in that Eastern Conference that are out of sight, out of mind, and you forget about a little bit. Travis Hamonic was one of those guys for me. And then Nicholas Madden-Paulo, I believe is how you pronounce it. I apologize if I butchered that. Rounds things out as the third defensive pairing. Going to be interesting to see if it's Anton Forsberg or Linus Ullmark in net here tonight. Anton Forsberg, of course, another fellow Blackhawks legend, so maybe he gets a little honorary nod in between the pipes. On the Blackhawks side of things, taking a look at their lineup, it's been kind of mixed and mashed over the last few games, with Kurashev going on IR, Doc and Athanasiou coming back up. Nick Foligno's out of the lineup right now, so kind of predicting the Blackhawks lineup is a little tough at this point in time. But what I want to do, Blackhawks fans, is I'm obviously recording this prior to the morning skate. I want to get into the lineup that I want to see the Blackhawks go with tonight, should Nick Foligno be able to return from that back injury. That's no guarantees. We didn't see him at the morning skate on Monday and obviously didn't play in that game. But if he's healthy enough to suit up, these are the combinations that I want to see the Blackhawks go with. I mentioned this when recapping the game, the victory against the Kings, despite Ryan Donato and Teuvo Teravainen continuing to do their thing, both players extending their point streaks to 5 games. Connor Bedard now doesn't have points in 6 consecutive games, his longest stretch of the season. You can tell the frustration is really starting to get to him. I'm sure it's been nice to win a couple of games in a row here, but he definitely wants to be chipping in and helping out more than he has been. And I just think it's time to get him more consistent help. I think it's time to put Teuvo Teravainen on that top line. And I know Teuvo's worked really well with Ilya Mikheyev, and you kind of like to use him sometimes in shutdown roles from time to time. I still think offensively, with how good he's been over the last nearly 3 months now, in the top 15 in the NHL in points during that stretch, you got to give him time with Connor Bedard. They just have not spent a lot of time playing with one another this season. And if Ryan Donato's in this game, why not load up Teuvo Teravainen, Connor Bedard, and Ryan Donato? That's the trio I'd like to see. And even if Donato's in the lineup, or should he not be, if you don't want to go with Donato there, and if you know, Foligno's not back and you got to use Donato at center, then go Teuvo, Bedard, and Mikheyev. I think Mikheyev's been excellent as well for a majority of the season. I've definitely been pumping up his tires all year long and talking about how he's been one of the most underappreciated members of this team. He's worked well with Teuvo, and I still think that trio while you want them to do good things offensively, Mikheyev's responsible on the defensive side of things. So is Teravainen. I wouldn't hate that trio, but I'd like to see Teuvo, Bedard, and Donato as long as Ryan Donato is here. For the second line, should Nick Foligno be in the lineup, I'd like to see Frankie Nazar, Nick Foligno down the middle, and then Ilya Mikheyev at the right wing spot. I think with the way that Nazar and Mikheyev can wheel out there and buzz and play the complete 200-foot game, I think they'd work really well alongside one another, can be very defensively responsible, take some of the defensive responsibilities off of Teravainen and Donato along with Connor Bedard. As far as the third line goes, Slaggert and Bertuzzi played on the same line last game. Go with Lukas Reichel down the middle between those two. I think Lukas Reichel deserves to be up in the lineup a little bit more. He's got points in back-to-back games. The wheels have been on full display. He's been drawing penalties, doing a lot of good things, has number 73. I'd like to reward him for it. Get him some time maybe with two power forwards like Slaggert and Bertuzzi who can crash the net while Reichel enters the zone. And then to round things out, I'd go with Colton Dach. You absolutely got to keep him in the lineup after a sharp game on Monday night. Andreas Athanasiou is capable of playing the center position. Might as well have him do it while he's here. And then Craig Smith on the fourth line as well. He and Athanasiou provide some good wheels. Colton Dach provides the physicality and the size. That would leave Pat Maroon as the healthy scratch. On the defensive side of things, Vlasic and Crevier, the trees pairing. I'm not exactly sure what to call them, but definitely leave them with one another. Ethan Del Mastro and Connor Murphy, I like them as a duo. Del Mastro has 2 goals in his last 3 games. And listen, if you've been along for the ride with me, Blackhawks fans, you know I've been a big stan of Ethan Del Mastro's. I believe I had him as high as number 3 or number 4 on my Blackhawks prospect list before, and you're starting to see why, because he's a big boy. He can play strong in the dirty areas, and he's got he has more offensive abilities than I think he gets credit for. Wyatt Kaiser's another guy who's been back up in the NHL these last couple of games. And like he was in his last stint, he is just, he plays a style of hockey that I love to see out of, that's so needed on this blue line and is winning hockey. Looks so much more poised and confident in his defensive abilities in his own zone. Thrives in transition and with his skating ability defensively, jumps up in rushes, jumps up into plays to get shots off on net. Really aggressive with the puck too. Shoots the puck a lot and has some of the best analytics on this Blackhawks team this season. I've been thrilled with Wyatt Kaiser. Got to keep him in the lineup for as long as he's up. And then that leaves him with Alec Martinez, who scored his 5th goal of the season in just his 34th game on Monday night against his former team in the Los Angeles Kings. Sorry, TJ Brody, but with the squad winning once again, I don't see how he cracks into the lineup, and that should probably be the case more often than not in these final 21 games of the season. The million-dollar question, Blackhawks fans, will we see Spencer Knight back in between the pipes following his stellar team debut against the Kings, in which he stopped 41 of the 42 shots that he faced? My answer, hate to be a bummer, but no, I'm going with Arvid Soderblom, even though Knight was outstanding. Soderblom's been spectacular all year long, and it's his turn. I know Knight is going to kind of jump him in the depth chart rankings and in the priority line because he has the higher upside, but Soderblom, he's deserving of these opportunities down the stretch of the season as well. I think it's going to be a tandem 1A, 1B split, and whoever is riding the hot hand is, maybe going to get the edge in the couple more games in between the pipes. But there is everything I have on tonight's matchup with the Ottawa Senators. Again, a reminder, the puck drops at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap things up, still got to get into a Blackhawks NCAA prospects update. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can easily find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, before I close things out, Blackhawks fans, do briefly want to get into a Blackhawks college prospects update, as we're now just a couple of weeks away from conference tournaments beginning. Starting things off with Oliver Moore, who, congratulations to Oliver, was named Big Ten First Star of the Week after a 4-point weekend, 1 goal and 3 assists. That now has him up to 30 points, 11 goals, and 19 assists in 34 games on the season. 4th on the Golden Gophers in points. Really has been coming alive over the last month or so, aka the most important time of the season. And the Golden Gophers, I believe, have clinched the Big Ten regular season title. So congratulations to Oliver. Congratulations to Sam Renzel as well, who still is having a phenomenal sophomore season, but has certainly cooled down after getting off to a blitzing hot start. 27 points, 9 goals, and 18 assists in 36 games for Renzel. That's good for 5th on the Golden Gophers in points. I want to say he had like 22 points in the opening 15 games of the season or something like that. So the production hasn't kind of been as consistent as it was early on in the year, but make no mistake about it, still a really big development year out of Sam Renzel, one that probably winds up being his final year of college hockey, if I had to guess. And as far as Minnesota, they are now up to number 3 in the top 25. Very talented team that has national championship aspirations. Next up, speaking of college hockey honors, Blackhawks goaltender prospect Adam Guyan was named NCHC Rookie of the Week for the second time this season after making 51 saves over the weekend and posting a .944 save percentage in 2 games. That now has him up to 6-9-1 on the season. Has been a struggle-filled campaign for Guyan and the Minnesota Duluth Bulldogs as well. He's got a 3.25 goals against average, .889 save percentage, and 1 shutout in 17 appearances. Coming off of a struggling final year in the USHL, it has not been pretty for Guyan. No other way about it since the Blackhawks took him as the first goaltender off the board in the 2023 NHL draft. I think I misspoke the other day and accidentally called Adam Guyan a first-round pick. He was not, but he was the first goalie off the board. It has not been good in terms of his development process so far, but still very, very young. And my rule of thumb here on Locked On Blackhawks, never quit on a young goaltender. However, clearly the Blackhawks were concerned enough about him and also Drew Commesso taking a step back to go and nab a netminder like Spencer Knight. Speaking of the University of Minnesota Duluth Bulldogs, let's talk about Dominic James, who, as I broke down on yesterday's episode, sounds like the Blackhawks intend to have him sign his entry-level contract whenever the season comes to a close. He's the team leader in points this season as the captain with 26, 12 goals, and 14 assists in 31 games. I was looking at Minnesota Duluth stats on the season, and Jason Shogabay, some of you may remember when I did my Throwback Thursday episode, looking back at the Brandon Hagel trade during the Four Nations face-off break, Jason Shogabay was one of the 4th-round selections that Tampa Bay made in a pick they got from the Blackhawks. He's second on the team in points as a freshman, so certainly looks like Tampa did the most with that 4th-round pick. Moving on from UMD, next up we have the Providence Friars. John Mustard, 3rd-round pick in this past year's draft, having a really solid freshman season, 20 points, 7 goals, and 13 assists in 33 games. That's 4th on the team in points. 2nd in assists, though, as a freshman. Really solid stuff. And Providence is all the way up to number 6 in the top 25. Do want to bring up Tage Harding real quick, although offense and points are never really going to be his true determination of success, if you will. He's got 13 points, 2 goals, and 11 assists in 33 games. Former 3rd-round pick for the Blackhawks, another massive 6'7" left-handed defenseman. Moving on next to the Denver Pioneers, Aiden Thompson. 44 points now for him, 17 goals and 27 assists in 34 games. He's 2nd on the team in points, 3rd in goals, and 3rd in assists. Denver, like Minnesota, a very stacked roster with a very solid chance at repeating as national champions. Ryan Green in Boston University. Ryan Green, recently there was an article written by, I think it was Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times, talking about how he was very happy with his decision to return to BU for his junior campaign. He's got 28 points now, 12 goals, and 16 assists in 32 games on the season. 3rd on the team in goals, 4th in assists, 3rd in points. Maybe would have liked him to be the head honcho and lead the team in some of these categories, but still a fine junior season for him. Another guy like Dominic James, I'd imagine, signs his entry-level deal with the Blackhawks whenever the season comes to a close. Boston University currently ranked number 9. Next, we got Blackhawks 2024 first-round pick Sasha Boisvert in North Dakota. Boisvert has 25 points, 14 goals and 11 assists in 32 games this year. Leads the team in goals as a freshman. That shot of his is an absolute cannon. Also third in points. North Dakota has dropped down a little bit over these last few weeks. They're now number 18. It's going to be fun keeping an eye on all of these guys with just a couple weeks removed until conference play begins. Everyone's trying to make a run for the Frozen Four. Lots of Blackhawks prospects on teams that have a very good chance at doing so. I'll be keeping you all up to date as we get closer and closer towards conference tournament season. I'll also be speaking on either tomorrow's episode or Friday's episode about Blackhawks prospects in the OHL, in particular Nick Lardis and his push for 70 goals. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Again, thanks for bearing with me and hanging through the Locked On Blackhawks overlay. We'll be back to the regular scheduled video programming on tomorrow's episode. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.